Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a holistic coach and trauma-informed practitioner. Expect conversations where we can broaden the narrative beyond the confines of privileged circles of wellness and self-development. It is my intention to take my listeners on a deep personal journey of self-discovery, to shift away from band-aid solutions, to instead address the root causes that perpetuate ongoing cycles in your life, so that you can discover your authenticity and wholeness and truly heal and thrive. As you truly heal and thrive within yourself, you'll also be journeying together in collective discovery, understanding and uncovering the impact of how collective traumas shape our social structures and institutions and perpetuate the wider ongoing cycles of suffering. Here, diverse experiences are honoured, the status quo is challenged, and together we are fostering a space that stands for healing and thriving for all, so that we may all work, live, and parent better together. As a listener, you are not just here to passively consume, you're an ambassador for deep healing and societal evolutions, ready to engage in thought-provoking, challenging conversations. As your host, I'm committed to providing ever-expansive spaces that inspire us to contribute to a world defined by higher love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Enjoy. Crowned the Defender of Female Awesomeness by Caller magazine, Lisa offers support, space, remembrance, spiritual guidance, cyclic maps, ceremony and counsel to women who are exploring and navigating and wanting to heal their relationship with their body, power, sex, creativity, pleasure, and passion in these interesting times. She's the author of Code Red, Love Your Lady Landscape, Self-Sorcery, The Red Journal, amongst others, and she shares her sassy musings online as Sassy Lisa Lister and creates her she art with her plethora of oracle decks, including Sassy She Sirens, and Self-Sorcery. Lisa, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. Short of literally rolling out a red carpet for this conversation, I thought I would at least put something vaguely red on. I've been very excited.
I love it. I take it. Thank you so much.
No, this is a very exciting moment for me. I've loved your work for a very long time. We're talking serious fangirl territory for me. So I'm very grateful to have you in this space. And
we love those.
I remember reading Witch years ago when I was living in Bali at the time, and I was reading Witch on the beach, and my friend Sarah recommended it to me. She was like, you've got to read this. You've got to read this. Started reading it. And I was like, yes, I knew it. I knew this. And then going on to read Code Red, Love Your Lady Landscape, and just discovering so much of myself and my journey with PCOS and endometriosis within your words too. So I've followed your work for a long time for different reasons and just got so much out of it. So firstly, grateful, and a real thank you on a personal note.
Oh, and I am receiving. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you.
So as an introduction, and of course I imagine that a lot of my listeners will know who you are, but for the sake of those who perhaps haven't yet come into your work, could you speak a little bit to your background and just how you came into this work, maybe dabbling into your journey of PCOS, endo, whatever comes up, but just a little bit of a background into you and how you came into all of this work.
Awesome. No, thank you for asking. Yes, where to start, really? Ultimately, this being a woman luck isn't like the easiest of experiences, and it's not meant to be, I don't think. Like, I don't think it's meant to be, because like it really helps us, if we're awake to it, to like really meet our edges, feel the rub, because that's when the pearl's made, right? So that's what I feel about the whole experience of being me in this body. Now, I didn't used to. So my work predominantly is around cycles. It's around the cycles of life, the cycles of womanhood, the cycles of our body, the cycles of the cosmos, and like how, for me, that becomes the most fabulous, exciting structure and system that can serve and support women specifically, but all of us as humanity, in terms of navigating this world, this current kind of world, because it ain't set up in our favor. Let's be clear. right? So that's become the nature of my work. And it started with my own menstrual cycle. Like you say, I was working in a really male dominated industry, TV, magazine publishing. It was gorgeous. I loved it. I still do. I still look back on it really fondly. But ultimately, I was living from the neck up. Like I was
Mm.
very much disconnected from my body. So for me, it came in the form of PCOS, endometriosis, except there was no labels for it at the time. Didn't really know what was happening. I was bleeding more than I wasn't, self-medicating all the ways in which to numb that, push it down, pretend it's not happening so you can just get on, because that's the world that we've been told that
Yeah.
we must show up in. When I got told, so, you know, it's nice to get a label, don't get me wrong, there is something helpful when you've been struggling with, what is this? What even is this? It got a label from a doctor, you've got PCOS, you've got endometriosis. Okay, cool. What do we do about that? How do we work with that? What's this about? And ultimately, the response was, and I've written about this in some of the books, is that ultimately the response was, you're not going to be able to have kids, so we might as well whip it out. I'm like, whoa, whoa. And luckily, there was something in that moment. And now, for some people, there might not be, right? And so for some people, it might just be like, yep, that's the answer, I'll take it. But in this one, in me personally, there was very much a sense of there's something that's not cool. Like, that ain't cool. Like, I may not have been connected to my body at the time, but there was definitely a deeper wisdom in me that was going, no, calling out to pay attention. And so I did. And that has taken me on what's become this, what I've called like a Love Your Lady landscape adventure of just exploring my connection to myself, to my body, to understanding like why that is, why something like why endometriosis does show up for so many women, and like what that looks like on a more psycho-spiritual perspective. And never to be somebody that gives information or tells people what to do. That's not my remit. My remit this lifetime, I feel, is very much to feel and experience myself in this body, and to share that through the art I make, whether that's through the words I write, whether that's through actual art, whether that's through words I speak and share, like whether it's conversations like this. Just and simply because as women, us sharing is just so much more delicious than somebody saying, oh, this is happening to your ovaries, figure this out. It's, oh, actually, when I see a reflection, like what you were talking about when you read my books, is because I was simply sharing. I was simply sharing how it was for me. And there was a recognition in you that was like, oh, that's how it is for me too. And so then that becomes this beautiful web of weaving that we as women get to do together, where we tell our stories versus, oh, must do this, must do that, because it's not the same for each of us. And that's why I never wanted to be someone that was like prescribing, like, oh, you must do it this way, or this is, you're going to need to take this supplement, you're going to need to do this, you're going to need to do that. But exploring, there is this cyclical nature that actually, if we look at, there's some phases and there's some understanding and there's power and there's hotspots in each of those phases that we can work with and use and take advantage of and support us more than anything. Because, like I say, the societal kind of setup is not one that wants to support us as cyclical, powerful, like women in our power, women who know what it is to listen to our bodies and not abandon them.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I knew this conversation was going to be juicy.
Good.
I can relate so much to what you just shared there, in that I was diagnosed with PCOS when I was 27. My periods had completely stopped. I hadn't had a bleed for about a year, had all the other symptoms, signs alongside. And I had seen a specialist. I went to go and see a specialist an endocrinologist in Australia.
Yep.
And she diagnosed me saying, you're probably going to struggle to have kids. You're probably going to struggle with your fertility, and these whole range of symptoms, they're probably not going to go away because this is untreatable and incurable, which is a big thing to be told, 27. But also within that moment, and I knew nothing about inverted holistic health, alternative things at the time, but there was this thing in me, which was, I just don't believe that's true. I just don't believe what you're saying. And kind of observing the situation, listening to her and taking this on from a specialist, but also this thing like rising up within me of, this is not going to be the case for me.
Yes.
And what would you describe that as? It's like our innate truth, our innate pattern. What do you describe that as?
I don't think we have to have a word for it, because because it's so, but it is our innate knowing. It's a wisdom. It's something that we're not taught to connect to, but actually when we remember, and it's more of a remembering, and like like I mean, we both said, it's like, actually, something's not cool here, and
Yeah.
something deeper, some
Yeah.
deeper knowing, which is source deep. Like it's in our cells, it's in our bones, like
Mm.
knows something's not okay. And to trust that over a specialist, over somebody who we're told is an expert in this field, to trust
Yeah.
ourselves over that is a big ask. So to do that already, like, giving us huge props, and to anyone that's listening who has been able to ever feel that in any kind of conversation with their body, and a expert.
Totally. And yeah, I guess it's a nice segue into really what I want to be talking about throughout this conversation of this self-sorcery, because I
Yeah.
guess that power that rises up within, that is the thing that we get to really work with and connect to our intuition and connect to the truth and trust ourselves in a kind of new type of way. And I've heard you talk about, what you call these interesting times that we're living in.
Yeah.
So what do you see, just for context,
Hmm.
as these interesting times?
You just got to look around you, right? So it's this, I think
Yeah.
it's the difference between looking outside our window, is
Mm.
about watching what we're told. And again,
Yeah.
everything I'm saying, tongue in cheek, you just got to read between the lines of what I'm
Mm.
saying. And that's
Mm.
how I feel we have to navigate these times, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a story that's being told,
Mm.
and there's an experience that's happening, and then there's this really big melting, mixing cauldron pot of possibility that sits in the middle. And
Yeah.
so I feel like we're told this is how it is. Like, we're
Mm.
told the world's burning. We're told that there's so much death and destruction, and there is, right?
Mm.
So no one's taken away from the fact that there is. There absolutely is. But we're also told that we've got to think, and we're being very, very cleverly, carefully programmed, manipulated, told how to think, what to do, how to feel. When actually, if we were to, and if we can, because we have the access to it, right? And so this why, so for self-sorcery for me, is that this come to our senses, like literally use our senses, trust
Mm.
our instincts, and through that remember our magic, right? Because the spell is strong. So the societal spell is strong, and that's not conspiratorial. We can all put a tin hat on, we can all have those thoughts too, right? That's a whole different conversation.
I'll go and
But
get
like,
mine out the cupboard.
I was going to say, it's just down here on the left. And so it's, and yes, there's different levels to this, but ultimately there is a story being told, whether that's by mainstream media, whether that's through advertising, through, and it's been happening for a long time, especially for us as women, like how you should act, what you should, how it looks to be a woman, what you should be doing, you should be quiet, you should be this, that's millennial, and then being told how to then show up, what you should care about, what you should feel. Whereas the self-sorcery is my kind of response to that can be happening, and there
Yeah.
is also this possibility that we can create something different, that there can be hope, that there can be joy, that there can be pleasure. And that's very real and possible in the body if we remember how, if we remember to trust ourselves and what it is we think and feel, because we are being told what to think and feel right now. And
Mm.
it's like, actually, what if I feel something very different to what I'm being told? Like, I can't have that conversation right now because
Mm.
it feels uncomfortable, or it's not possible to have that, for instance. There's so many different, and so there's so many different things at play. But ultimately, for me, it comes down to the societal spell is specifically for women, and it's happening to humanity. I get it, but I speak to what it is to be a woman in this body, in this
Mm.
experience. For me, it's very much more about, this is how that doesn't feel right. So it comes back to that same feeling, like when an expert is telling me that this is happening to my body, we need to whip it out. There was something deeper in me that was like, I don't think so. That's not it. That's not it. And trusting that, and going on an adventure with that wisdom versus that information. And I
Yeah.
think self-sorcery comes back to our knowing, our
Mm.
wisdom, something deeper versus information and what we're told and sold. And
Mm.
that's the very basics of it.
Mm.
And now trusting that and is a daily practice, is definitely a daily practice. So I'm not saying it's like a 5-point plan, or there's a kind of set way in which we can do that. But there are definitely practices and ways through coming back to our body, and coming in, coming down into our
Mm.
body. Like, our head is smart, like it's smart, it's useful. And our body wisdom, like especially if we come down through the belly, like through the heart, through the belly, into that beautiful cauldron of possibility, of creativity, like so much is possible there. And we remember what we are capable of creating. Like we're taught that magic and fairy tales are not real, but they're very real. Like our capacity to create something, anything, like entire universes, if it's possible, from that space. We can, but it's trust in this innate knowing and wisdom in our body versus what we're being told and sold on the outside.
For someone who is not quite sure what the societal spells are, what do you feel like the societal spells look like? And because I love this word, by the way, societal spells. When I first heard you use it, I was like, yes. What do you feel? And I totally agree with everything you said, especially for women. There's so many of these strong narratives of how we should be marketing, etc. But what do you see in terms of like our day-to-day where we are experiencing these societal spells? What are the societal spells that you see within society?
Great question. I love it. I think shame, like women, specifically around like women, what even writing about self-sorcery, the idea of that being like self-care. And that self-sorcery, it's very basic, by the way, like it's fiercely more deeper than that. But ultimately, self-care, choosing, self-choice, choosing yourself versus choosing to fill yourself all the way up. The shame around choosing you, around being, because we're told, oh, that's selfish. It's selfish to put yourself first. It's selfish to choose you. So the shame, and it starts so young. It starts so young in specifically in women. And then and it doesn't matter because then it goes, so you go, oh, so perhaps if we're told we can't have kids, oh, what, you're not going to be a mother? Oh. And so then we feel, maybe some women feel like they have to then work harder to prove themselves in a different way. And the shame of not having a child, so therefore you have to make up for it in some way by working harder and faster and being more of something else, down to the fact that you want to be taking lovers and not having a relationship, or like a one-person relationship, or whether and who you choose to have those relationships with, for instance. Like the list is endless, but the predominant, I would say, is shame, and then it's blame. So we blame women for everything. Like it's women's fault, it's this, it's that. There was a story in the newspaper this weekend about a female politician. They're talking about her clothes. They're talking about she's from a working class background, so should she be wearing a £500 outfit? What are we doing? We don't do that to the dudes. No one's asking the dudes how much their outfit is, and whether they deserve to wear a £500 outfit. Like, what are we doing? So I think it starts there. And you can see it in the advertising, like, you're not quite good enough, like you should fix this. Oh, that's like any pain point. But these pain points are created, like they're created. They're not even there. They're created predominantly, again, to sell stuff, right? And it's to make us feel like we're not good enough so that we then buy more things, ultimately. And I am not against buying things because I like things, right? I am not against that at all. What I'm saying is, then it comes back to that self-sorcery. It's about our choice. Like, it's your choice, not a choice, not something that's being dictated to you. Oh, I must have long hair, or I must have tight skin, or I must have. No one's judging the acts of what happens if you choose to do something about that. My interest personally is in, are you choosing that for you? Or is that for a male gaze? Is that for a societal gaze? Is that somebody wanting something of you versus you choosing that as an expression of you? And if it's an expression of you, go for your freaking life. That's where I sit with it, is I want women to be in their fullest knowing, so that anything that they choose to, any way they choose to live, any way they choose to show up, any way they choose to express themselves and their work in the world is celebrated and valued. You don't have to agree with it. I don't agree with every single woman in the world, but I celebrate every woman having the opportunity to do it, whatever they want, in whatever way feels good for them, versus feeling like they have to fit into a societal norm and never experiencing what it is to actually become more of themselves, to be full of themselves. Again, we're told, right? Oh, don't be, you're so full of yourself. Who else of? Like, what else am I going to be full of? I better be full of myself, because that's how I can be of service to the world. You don't want me full of myself, because if I'm depleted and I'm burned out, I'm much more easier to manipulate. I'm much more easy to sell to. So I
Mm.
would say for me, they're some of the big ones, but just
Mm.
even recognizing in terms of aging and things, like I'm in my 40s and I'm aware of the story, the
Yeah.
narrative around what it is to be a woman in her 40s. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not, you don't get to write my story. You don't get to speak
Mm.
my story over me either. But the work in which to maintain that kind of agency and power as a woman, as a human, is like it's
Mm.
not easy to just be like do that in a society that doesn't want you to
Yeah.
do that.
Totally. And I think that a big shift happened for me when I recognized that a lot of people financially benefited from me not feeling good enough.
Right?
And actually, me loving myself was
Uh-huh.
almost a rebellious act. And
Exactly.
when I started to see it as that, something really shifted for me too. And I also hear in what you just shared there, if there's this real difference in it's not about the things,
Uh-huh.
buying the things like
Mhm.
that. It's about choosing to buy the things as like a kind of desire of I don't need this thing to complete me, but I want this thing to make me
Yes.
feel amazing. Which I guess like that is the difference there, and bringing our conscious choice making to that is what I hear.
And I think recognizing that we always do have a choice. I think,
Yeah.
again, it's not, some people don't always like to hear it. And a lot of people often say, oh, I don't have a choice. We all have a choice. And that's painful to hear sometimes,
Mm.
because sometimes it's much easier to not take, to be like, hand the power over, right? Because we've
Mm.
been taught, again, very successfully, that you ain't got a ton of power. So it's better that someone else makes the decisions for you. And it's,
Yeah.
oh, actually, if I choose, I can choose this, but it's not necessarily going to please everyone. And
Mm.
then that's another part of the story, is because we've been taught really successfully that we should please and appease, and that we should be seen, maybe seen and be beautiful, and not heard as much, because that's not ideal. And so
Mm-hmm.
those stories, whether that's like from the 1950s, whether that's from years and years before that, or whether that's today, right? Those stories are still in us
Mm.
subconsciously, and we're having to unpick and unravel and rewrite those on the daily. And that's potentially exhausting, but also we're creative beings. When we remember that we're super creative and that we've also got a very active imagination, like we can turn the fears into the biggest truths, right? So why don't we also work out how we can tell the biggest, beautiful, creative possibilities for ourselves and then live
Mm.
into it?
How do you see societal spells as being exhibited within our healthcare for women? Is there anything that comes up for you there?
The fact that everything around healthcare is, there's nothing that's been tested on or for women. So we're talking about these things, and we're having to explore. That's why so many women, I think, are looking to holistic and outside of healthcare systems per se, because there's nothing there for us. And since no one's done the tests for women, like they've all been done on dudes, everything regarding our health has been done on dudes, right? So it's almost like around the pill, around all of these things, we have to also recognize, again, it comes back to choice. No one's saying don't or do take the pill, but there's always got to be choice.
Mm.
For me, what the most important part is having this is capacity to choose and to make informed decisions based on your body, on your situation. Other people should not get the opportunity to do that. That's a strong narrative, that
Yeah.
these people have all the answers, that
Yeah.
people we call medical professionals. And that's not me dissing the medical profession. What I'm saying is we have also got to recognize that we know, if we listen and know, we recognize the difference between the information we're being given and then the knowledge and wisdom of our body, and then we get to make an informed choice. That's how I see it. I know that's not
Yeah.
true for everybody, but
Yeah.
that's definitely how it is for me, having been through it. And I'm sure if anyone has experienced what we've experienced in terms of somebody wanting to just go, it's just easier to whip it out. What feels for me a very like beautiful part of my body that I didn't know about, and
Mm.
now I know about. I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't let them take that. Now, for
Yeah.
some people, that would be exactly the right choice, and that their world and life has been exactly as it should be. That's
Mm.
what I mean. There's no judgment. And that's what I think is really important in how we share and what we're talking about, is there's no judgment. I'm just sharing my experience, and recognizing that the people we're told that have all the answers don't
Mm.
always have all the answers for you.
Yeah. totally. And just one more question, I guess, in regards to the societal
Yeah.
spells. Do you see that we've got societal spells within even the wellness industry? The wellness industry is quite a big umbrella term, but
Sure.
what societal spells do you see as even within wellness?
I see it even more in wellness than I see it in most places.
Amen. Yes.
And I think that's also because people have got really good skill sets of being able to work a system. It becomes for me, it feels way more manipulative and way more icky when it gets
Yeah.
into this space, because people are using very manipulative tools from outside spaces and bringing it into a place where you're hoping for like support, and people are sometimes at their, because people are seeking in this space, they're wanting help and support, and so they need some of these very manipulative kind of skill sets that are used to sell and spell people are then used and taken, I think, potentially taken advantage of, right? Which is why for me it's like the self-sorcery, the self-knowing, the self-understanding. And it's only, honestly, there's nothing technical or there's something deeply magical about what I share, but there's also something very practical, which is it's down to to knowing yourself and then not abandoning that and trusting that over what you're being told about your body, but about your spirituality, about if that's the space we're covering, right? And yeah, it's become very, I'd say, even in the 20 years that I've been part of that kind of space, I would say, like wellness, spiritual space. And of course, we're in it. And of course, it's just having the awareness, I think, of how to navigate. And that's why I say about, like, you don't necessarily need to know the spells. You just need to be aware that they're there. And then you need to understand yourself first and foremost. And then you trust that. You trust you trust your heart, you trust your wisdom as a guiding force. And then you find the right people. You know that there are good people. And there are in every industry, in every space. And you trust that above whoever's got the glossiest, like biggest sell, for instance, or any of that stuff. And you trust. And I feel like that's part of this growing ourselves up, like not being so infantilized that we trust what we're told all the time. It's like actually growing ourselves up, taking some self-responsibility and being like, that doesn't feel right, except what, like, they've got like 10,000, 12 million followers or whatever. Oh, so they must know what's happening with my womb. No. No. But do you feel that when, and that's the difference with, if we trust ourselves, then if we're in that space, which you and I are, if we're in that space, then it's also, you want to make sure your truth is being broadcast, that your kind of frequency is solid, strong, rooted, good, and like a beacon of light and support and hope for other humans versus my shit.
Yeah, totally. And I guess what I hear in all of that is like this, not doing this outsourcing of power.
Yeah.
So amidst the societal spells, what is the antidote to these societal spells? I guess this is the self-sorcery piece. So I'd love for you to dive a little bit more into self-sorcery, what that is, how we go about it, and just an invitation for us to be on that journey and what that looks like. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And of course, it could sound like a catch-all. As I've been talking about it, I'm aware that also it is self-care, but it's also trust. And it's also the things that do not come easily in a world that is not set up for us to trust ourselves and our bodies. It's such a big ask. Like you were saying, how courageous it was to make a choice of self-care, of self-love. And again, because those things have been so well packaged and sold to us, we also think there's ways in which that has to be done in order for it to be successful, which is like journal for 5 minutes, and meditate for this a long time. And like you say, go to Bali, do the things, all of which are gorgeous if you've chosen to do them. But if they're things that you are doing because you think you should, that's what all this comes down to, is recognizing the shoulds and all the things we're told and trying to put that aside. Now, I'm not saying that's easy either, but put that aside so that we can come in, because what we're looking to do is trust this one. And our truth will be different to your truth, but there will be similar threads and themes, right? So we can talk about these things. And again, self-sorcery is not about doing it yourself. It's not about saying, everything outside of you is wrong. It's no, it's trust myself so that I know that when I find the right people, I can open this heart wider. When I find the right people or the right book or the right information or the right medicine or the right kind of location, even, it's like you will know versus, oh, that's what I was told. Oh, that's what I was recommended. And again, I'm all up for recommend, but it's the trust. It's the trust. And this is the piece that for me comes when we are able to come in, come down, and recognize that there's a way and it's your way. That isn't anything you'll read in a book. And it's a trust that what wants to be revealed and remembered is if we get a little bit stiller, if we lean back and we're into a much more into our ancestral nervous system, we can trust ourselves a bit deeper. We're not forward, we're not on our phones, we're not our peripheral vision is open. Like we've got wide vision because this is where the magic happens, just in this space, just here. And then we've got this capacity then to stretch. And when we've got a capacity to stretch, we can hold more. And by more of who you are versus like all of the things that you're told to be, right? So this capacity to stretch means that you're like, oh, okay, so I can be more compassionate. I can witness that there is a horror show going on in the world. And I can also let joy, pleasure, satiation, nourishment be available and present at exactly the same time in this body, in this beautiful vessel, right? And I think that for me has been the work. Coming into connection with my body through endometriosis and PCOS has meant that I've recognized that my body holds immense wisdom, that we can connect into ancestral wisdom through our body. We can connect into like lifetimes and timelines if you want to get like very quantum and about it, right? We can then remember that we get to create what's next. We get to create the reality in which we live, which people, I don't want to sound like manifesting 101. It's not that. Again, a lot of the words around the things that I think really matter are being very co-opted. They're gorgeous like sound bites, right? But the truth is, if we come in and down into our body, into our pelvic bowls, if we trust that we are connected at source as source, so the primordial kind of creative energy that resides in us at our roots, resides in the roots of nature, resides in the roots of the cosmos. We are just simply reflections of that. Then we put ourselves first. And again, courageous act in a world where you're told that's selfish and indulgent. But it's absolutely categorically necessary in order for you to fill up, because when you're full up, you're then able to be of service. You're then able to fully be present to what is. Versus reactionary, versus we're forever like, oh, we've got a quick 5-minute break, let's get on Instagram, let's find out, oh, I'm mad, you've made me mad, then you're writing a response and then you're cross and then that's sent off. And no, we want to respond to the world. We want our body to be this beautiful, and our life experience to be a response to versus a reaction to, because that reaction is inflammatory and everything is set up, like I say, the societal spells are set up to keep you inflammatory, to keep you burned out, to keep you like angry. And I'm not saying don't be angry, I'm not saying that women are not rageful enough sometimes because they're not encouraged to express themselves in that way. What I mean is that kind of affected inflammatory, you have that inflicted upon you versus it's a felt from the belly fire that you're cross for the nature of the world, which is a totally different energy than, again, being told you should be cross about this, now be cross about this, now be really angry about this, react to that, versus, oh, do you know what, the mama energy in me is so mad at how we are treating this earth that I need to respond. And that's a very different energy and can only really, I think, be accessed if we are in our bodies, rooted down into the roots of Mama Earth and being able to source ourselves from that space, nourished, satiated, like love-filled, so that the frequency we work from, the frequency we create from is love. Like it's, and again, that can sound as twee as it likes. I'm not a twee person, but it's the truth. And it's what I've witnessed through my own lived experience. So that's all I'll ever share from.
Yeah, totally. And how can people, and I know that you've written multiple books on this, I'm not expecting you to summarize it within the next 10 minutes, but how can people really start to build that self-trust, that rooting into your body? I guess for me, that was that journey started with the cycle awareness. That it was that mapping of where I was, my energy, my body, and seeing how much that fluctuated. You talked about the cycle of the seasons, the ebb and flow, seeing myself as part of that and giving myself permission to be different, which is again like against the societal norm of
Right.
supposed to be the same all of the time. And
Exactly.
recognizing that I am a different person each day and having this comprehensive map and permission of myself. I guess that for me was the trust and the safety, and certainly building that. Would
Yeah.
you say that was this kind of start for you, or how else
Absolutely.
did you build this?
But no, that's exactly
Mm.
it, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I come from a lineage of women who would be who are like, I'm from a gypsy lineage, and
Mm.
these women would have been considered witches. They
Mm.
wouldn't say it out loud because they wouldn't. And so there's been an element of secrecy in around holding that magic. So it wasn't, and I feel like that was part of why, and the endometriosis showed up for me was because I
Wow.
was concealing my magic. And I think you'll find that a lot of women who
Yeah.
have experienced it, and I'm sure if you were to look at your own experience as well, that there's
Yeah.
concealment of your magic and medicine. And that's what I feel like has become this entire for me, my Love Your Lady Landscape experience over 20 years now, nearly, is this mapping and tracking and feeling my way through the experience of being a woman. So we're taught that most women, if you know about cycle awareness, it's been because you're trying for a baby or because you need to know where your cycle's at in order to know when you're most fertile. For me, and sounds like for you too, it's the most gorgeous way to get to know yourself. And for me, that's all we're here for, right? To live a full spectrum experience and recognizing that through our menstrual cycle, we have this capacity to move through a series of phases each and every menstrual month, which also coincide with, like, can also be mapped over the experience of womanhood, this kind of maiden, mother, creatrix, this kind of what I call charmed and dangerous perimenopausal phase. And then there's this like wise wisdom that comes with, and those the kind of charmed and dangerous and the wise woman are the parts of the society kind of neglect, because for the most part, if you're like, when you've become a mother, women get forgotten about, and we've only got to look at the media stories for that, right? You've either got to be Helen Mirren and be like beautiful and fit and smart and intelligent, or you become this like kind of dowdy but very funny or very intelligent older woman. That's your option, right? Which is why I love that the perimenopausal phase, the premenstrual phase, they can all be mapped onto each other as this
Mm.
charmed and dangerous phase. And it's dangerous because we're really exploring who we are, like, because the amount of shit you give about most things start to lessen, right? And you have this greater capacity for, oh, this is what the world looks like. This is what it could be. So I quite enjoy the looking at the second half of the cycle and witnessing where we've been told that we lose our power, when actually this is where the power is at its
Mm.
strongest in us as women. So there's that, but it's just the mapping and the tracking of the phases, knowing that there's days in the month when I'm super useful, that I'm articulate, that I'm able to put a sentence together. And there's times when I'm absolutely not. And then to not be, and not to use those things as a stick to beat myself with anymore. And I feel like that's the self-sorcery for me is, oh, when I know myself, I'm kinder, I'm nicer to me. That's the biggest spell breaker of all, is if we can turn the self-hate that we've been programmed to hate on ourselves, to get this, you need to be better, you need to do this, you need to do that, and actually, oh no, I love me. And I love, and it can start with, I understand, and I write about this too, like love can be such a big word. It holds a lot of potency. When you recognize that, oh, I've mapped, and and it's not just the menstrual cycle, but it's like when you can do it with astrological signs, you can, like when the moon's in certain astrological signs, like, how do I show up? What does it mean? And there's so many different maps, but they're all yours, and you just can collect them, and you can see that they can map on top of each other. It's glorious. And for me, that's how the self-sorcery is the way. And when I say the way, it's just more about coming in and getting excited about the things that what I want to fill up on. So for me, it is astrology. For me, it is literary kind of women throughout history who have been ignored. And I can find all of these new things that I'm getting this brand new passion for, because I'm more interested in what I'm interested versus what I'm being told to be interested in. And and I follow that. And so then that becomes like the lived experience versus, how I should be living at this age, when I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to France and I'm going to follow this woman that was around in the 1800s. I want to know where she was. I want to know what she did. And I just had an adventure with myself, and it was gorgeous. And that's when we can do things like that, when we know ourselves and when we're not like listening to outside kind of voices, be like, what are you doing that for? What's the purpose? No, I think when we drop the fact that there's a purpose and it's actually about the lived experience for us here, this lifetime is actually, you're in this beautiful vessel of a human. Go and experience it. Experience what it wants to do, what lights it up, what makes it, what gets it on, what sets it alight, what sets it on fire, what feels good, what feels really bad as well. Know the difference, which is why the senses are so useful.
Yeah. I feel like I'm literally smiling ear to ear because I'm just in love with this phrase of charmed and dangerous.
Oh, I know,
I love the idea of connecting so deeply and the richness of that being so big that we're actually dangerous to the rest of society.
And that's it, because of course we're not dangerous, because of course we're literally just coming online to who we are. Like the alignment comes in that. And it's just, that's so dangerous to a societal kind of committee who are like, no, but we don't want you to actually realize how powerful you are, because then you might change everything. Yes, we might. We just bloody might. We just bloody might.
I know that intuition as well comes up a lot, especially within the self-sorcery. Could you speak to that? Because so many women that I come across all say, I just want to connect more to my intuition. I'm not quite sure what it feels like and how to work with it and how to build more of it. And I have my ways of doing it, but I'm just curious how intuition feeds into self-sorcery for you too.
And it comes back to trust, right? So it's the trust, and it's when we remember how to feel, and I'm not the practical sense of that as well. I mean, the senses, like trust in our senses. So when something smells off, and when I say smell, I mean that can taste off, that can be like it, but it's this, you can recognize there's something off here, and it's not a head. And I think that's for me, that's the differentiation, is like we're probably very well versed in listening to the voice in our head, because that's the one that's been programmed. It's much harder we're untamable in our body. Like our voice, our intuitive voice is untamable, but she can be silenced. She can be like muffled by like societal kind of conditioning, right? So what we're looking to do is just recognize, like we've done in this whole conversation, recognize the societal muffling, all the ways in which that might have happened, like through blame, shame, all of those things. And then we're going to give her some space. And it's simply like a deeper voice. And for me, it's one that I access when my heart, my belly and my womb are aligned. It's almost like they're the guiding force. And I can't go wrong because I only trust that. So I can hear, don't do that. That's a stupid idea. Why are you signing that? That makes no sense. And then if I come in, and again, it's the leaning back and remembering not to lean, like the leaning back is ancestral. We literally relax our whole nervous system if we can move into the back body. And we can come into the back body, relax, come down into our body. You can do that through breath, but you can just do it by holding, sometimes touching ourselves, literally like our belly and our womb space, by putting our hands on it and remembering that underneath there is where our power resides. Coming into that and then asking the question, like, what's happening here? What are we doing? Asking the question there. And then trusting what we hear. And remember, what we hear isn't always words. Like it can be colors, it can be sensations, it can be all of those things. Again, you learn your own language. You do learn, but it's a trust thing. It's a trust thing. And I've got no other words for that apart from I had to tell myself I am a safe space for years before all of this became a real truth for me. Like it was very much a story, and it was very much something that I was able to access occasionally. And like literally because I come from a lineage of witches does not necessarily mean that was like you just click your fingers and you're in it. It's almost, and that's why in self-sorcery the emphasis is on remembering, because there's nothing to do. And that, again, we've been told so much, you have to do this, you have to do that. Give me the answers, give me the answers. There are none. There are none. It's simply a remembering. And that happens when we lean back, because that's ancestral. Whether we lean against a beautiful tree, but like whether we're leaning back into our own back body, which is our own ancestry. It's like that remembering. And then with the remembering comes the trust. Okay. And then the daily, and of course, I wasn't said earlier about the not journaling. I journal every day, right? I'm just saying it's like, but it's just finding the thing. I just don't want people to feel like there's a set way, because there really isn't. And sometimes that's really annoying, because I'd love to be able to say, there's a 10-point plan here. Look, just do all of these things every single day, and this will happen. For me, the consistency is in the recognition of self, like in the recognition of my own map. So I know that in my premenstrual phase, for instance, I'm not going to be able to sit still long enough to meditate. That's of no interest to me. So I'll journal. Like, I'm not interested. So I'm not going to beat myself up and go, oh, I'm no longer a spiritual person because I'm not meditating daily. No. When everyone says, oh, it's a discipline, I'm not into discipline. Like, self-sorcery is a devotion. And it's devotion to yourself through ritual versus discipline through, right? So that's the difference. And that's what we're looking at. So even in the language, right, it's more sensorial, it's more gorgeous. Let it be as luxurious and yummy and delicious versus this. Okay, so a spiritual practice should look like you're up at 4, you're doing this, you're doing that. And of course, that works for some people, good for you, not me. And not necessarily for a lot of women either. And I just didn't want anyone to be beating themselves up because they can't do that. Because I did. I trained to be a yogi. I've done a lot of yoga training, and I'm grateful for it. And the teaching was beautiful, and it's not mine. So it was like there was lots I can take from that I enjoyed and loved. And it's like there's actually some more devotional practices which I've now been able to give myself, which are more loving to me, but mean I'm able to go deeper and trust myself more.
Yeah, I love that. And it really resonates with me, because for a long time, I had my, in inverted commas, good girl spiritual practice where I did my yoga, did my meditation, did my journaling, 10 minutes of this, 15 minutes of that, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And then it dawned on me that I was bringing my own societal spells into my spiritual practice. And I was also perpetuating my cycles of high achieving and perfectionism. And I was reinforcing so much of my not enoughness in a space which the intention was to make me feel enough. So it makes so much sense what you've just said there. And I love it. And when I had that shift too, it brought so much like freedom and liberation into my practices, because it was, again, checking in with my body. How am I feeling? What do I feel like doing today? Let me get out of my toolkit of wonderful things that I love doing, but then tuning in with how I feel and what would serve me best. And sometimes it might be like, I actually just want to have a cup of tea in bed, and that's going to be glorious. And that's my spiritual practice.
And I was exactly the same. And it felt, for me, this has been the most freeing part of self-sorcery, is the recognition of a spiritual practice for somebody who is cyclical will look very different for each and every one of us. So actually witnessing some people, everyone telling you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, is, oh, that's literally been painful on this body, ability as well. And so I'm really good at yoga because I'm super hypermobile, but I didn't know that at the time. So I'm like, I'm so good at this, and I'm going to keep forcing my body. Yet then I'm like so tired, and I'm like, how? And now I realize that I was pushing my body way too hard to do certain things that it can do, but it shouldn't do that. And so just that recognition of, oh, that's not how it is. And now this devotional practice to self, recognizing ourselves as like she. For me, that's how this works for me, is like the she, goddess, priestess, however you look at kind of divine energy. For me, is as long as we need to be loving on ourselves the same way we would bow to deity, to she, to a goddess, to the feet of a statue of someone we're told to love on. And I think that's the ask, and it can feel really uncomfortable to do that. And actually, the act of doing it will change everything. It will change your whole cellular structure. It will change lineages of ancestral trauma because this may not have been done in that lineage before. And you're changing everything for the women that have been before and the women that will come after.
And what I hear there is something that happened for me is that my inverted commas spiritual practices stopped just being my practices and more like devotion entered into my way of life. It just became how I am and what I do. Not, I was going to say 24/7. There are probably parts of my day which are not in full devotion.
Because
However,
we're human.
because we're human. However, devotion became a way of life as opposed to my devotional morning practice. And then I go about the rest of my day.
And also, I think when even you explaining that, like these things have become quite indicative of if we're, again, because we're shown on social media, for instance, this is what a morning practice or a spiritual practice should
like. I bought many books on it.
And this is the thing, is like when we're shown a thing, and of course, like if a beautiful aesthetic is available, I love a beautiful aesthetic. I'm very Venusian. I love a pretty thing. And so I'm very aware that's a part of my nature. And so it's, do I want that? And if I do, like, how does that fit with my experience? And so, like you say, it's like having the toolkit, but not, yes, a toolkit, but there's just this also gorgeous, like, vanity case of potential, right? It's just, oh, today it's a cup of coffee. Tomorrow it might be movement. The next day it might be a run. Like the next day it might just be like a gorgeous little cuddle with your partner. Like all of the possibilities. And like you said, then I love, because this is what happens. And this is self-sorcery, because it's not about a one-time event. It becomes the whole thing. Like life becomes ritual. Life becomes ceremony. Yes. And then that's when it's just gorgeous, because that's how it should be. Yes. Like I say in self-sorcery about, like, I just want my temple back. And there's just part of me sometimes that just longs for that, like everything being devotional and gorgeous and creative and loving. And of course, like that wouldn't make sense in this world either. What we're trying to do, and why for me self-sorcery is so important, is that we have access to both, like that we can hold the potential horror shows of what's happening in the world, like the war, the destruction, what's happening to the climate, what's happening to Mama Earth, all of these things, like we can hold without getting like too stuck on it, but aware and alive to it. Aware and alive to that, but also aware and alive to beauty, to art, to magic, to potential, to creativity, and letting both be present at exactly the same time, because that's how we're able to then to let hope be present, for one, because I'm concerned that hope will go out the window if we lean so heavily into reactionary responses to what we're told and sold on social media and on the TV. Versus, okay, if I'm full, I'm going to be way more of service to my community, to the people that need me, to be able to be supportive in the spaces and places where I show up.
Yeah, totally.
That'll be different for each of us.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a podcast that I was listening to this morning, which was talking about, especially with everything that is going on in the world right now, our ability to hold anger and shame, but then also act from that place too. And that's what I hear you saying as well, of like self-sorcery, really expanding our ability to be present with everything that's going on, but then also respond, act, move forward, hold hope, and all of these things together
instead of reacting. And there are some of us that are meant to be activists. There are some of us that are here to be the fire, to be the igniter, to be the one that leads the way in that. And there are other paths as well. And I think it's the recognition, again, it comes back to knowing ourselves. If we know who we are, we then don't get so easily swayed by how we're told. I won't have a story put upon me. I won't have my story spoken to me, spoken of me, spoken over me. You tell your story. You tell how it is for you. And that's because I know me through my cyclical nature, through my own mapping and tracking. And I think, like you say, that's been the last 20 years for me, is like these maps and like mapping and tracking my experience. And so if we all did a version of that, and no one's saying go map your menstrual cycle, it will help. I'm a fierce advocate. And or whether you're just someone that's aware of the moon phases, whether you're in tune with the seasons. If you know you're a summer person and you love the sunshine, then there's much more chance that you're going to be somebody that's active and out there and willing to be seen, willing to be heard, versus somebody who loves winter, who's really good at creating and being like introverted and reading all the good books and finding out all the detail for us all. Like, we've all got our ways. We've all got our seasons. We've all got and if we know them, and that for me is mainly what self-sorcery is, through self-care, through self-devotion, through love of self, we're then able to know ourselves so deeply that we don't abandon ourselves, so that we then can root down into something real, so we know who we are. We reveal more of ourselves as we keep going, keep showing up, so that we're then able, like you said, to respond. I just don't want us all react, like being in that inflamed reactionary sensation, because that will deplete us, or we will notice that in our health. People are already noticing that in their health from being so fearful of all the stories that we're being told. It's actually, if we just were able to breathe, come in, listen, lean back. And these are very basic. And again, I try and keep it as practical as I can. But it's as deep as the ocean, this work, and it's as easy, she says, as daily remembrance, because it's remembering that there's nothing to do but everything to remember.
One thing that was coming up, you mentioned around repeating to yourself, my body is a safe space. And I just want to ask you, because it comes up with my work, women that I work with who might have gone through trauma, abuse, assault, something that's happened that's very real, very painful for their body, and they don't feel safe in their body, connecting to their felt experience, to their senses. What advice would you give to somebody to come into a place of safety and trust if that is what they're experiencing?
Go slow. Like, honestly, there's no rush. And I think, again, we're just told that we have to have the answers, we have to have it figured out. Like, it's lifelong. It's lifelong. And no one wants to take, like, when I'm saying like this body is a safe space, do I trust that every single day? No, but I have to tell myself that, because if I don't, no one else is gonna. So if I don't tell myself, and if I don't show up for myself in that way and be like, we're going to make this as safe as it can be. And like, in which I do talk about, like, we have to make it safe for each other, because it's not very safe. I'd love to be able to say, say what you think, say what you feel, say what's on your heart. And that's all that matters. And it's not actually, it's not that safe to do that. And so actually, for me, it's about knowing myself well enough to be like, practice discernment, not hypervigilance. So in that when we're in that traumatic space, when we're like, this is and the hypervigilance comes from that, it's actually, what can I do to just take it down a notch or two, so that I can practice some discernment regarding as to whether this is safe or not. Because don't let anyone else tell you it's safe. Don't let me tell you it's safe. Don't let someone in a book tell you it's safe to say what you want to say. You need to know that it feels safe for you, and you get to set that boundary. And that's what I mean about the choice. When people go, I've got no choice, like, we've all got choice. It's just the self-responsibility of that is sometimes really big. Like, it's really big to be able to say, shit, I'm gonna choose today to make this one safe. I have to do that. And it's really easy to go, oh no, it's not safe, so I'm not doing anything. And then we stay and freeze. And then it's really easy to then medicate. For so many of us, I've definitely done it, like to medicate, self-medicate, so that I felt a version of safety. But what's happened, and like I say, it's been a long period of time, 20-ish years, I think. And I'm not always feeling it. It's not a state that I stay in, but it's definitely something that I practice. And the more I know myself, the more I trust myself, the more capacity I have to stay there longer. And when I can stay there longer, then I can let more love be present. And when more love can be present, I can let more love in. Like, I can soften to receive. And I think that's some of the bigger things around the safety is, you ain't coming near. This armor is strong. I am Joan of Arc. Like, I have done the work to make sure I feel safe this way. But what that then does is keep a barrier between us. And that's no fun. That's not a fun life. That's not a lived life. That's just and I get why. I get all of the reasons why. Geez, I get all the reasons why. And I'm like, I'm not prepared to live that way anymore. So that was my choice. And again, that was the choice. I'm not prepared to live in fear of other people's expectations of me or of other people's versions that they would like to put upon me as to who I should be and how I should show up and how that should be. So with that, we drop, but it's softening slowly, daily, for a short amount of time, so that I can then practice, depending on where I am. Like if I don't feel good in a place, I'm not going to just say, oh, I feel safe, it's okay for me to speak here. The bigger decision in that is to practice discernment and go, I'm getting out. I ain't staying in a room that I don't feel comfy in, for instance.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you. Just lastly, speak to me about Venus.
I feel like Venus is the culmination. So if Witch was like, why? What's going on? Like, why? What's all this about? And the anger and the power that came up for so many of us when we read Witch, like Self-Sorcery, I feel is the way. And if people find that interesting but don't quite get it, because I understand, like when I speak to it, there's never a set one path way of explaining self-sorcery. So I get that. And there's reasons for that. It's layered and you'll feel it. If it's meant for you, you'll know. Whereas Venus then becomes is the lived experience of all of what we know, all of what we trust, all of what we remember. And so for me, Venus has been, because I'm a Scorpio, right? So I am cynical. I am very much side-eye of a lot of things. Believe when I say that I have not let a lot of joy and pleasure be present without holding on very tightly to the reins of how that looks and how that works. Venus has been like the cycle that has opened me up to realize to the capacity to self-source. Venus was what introduced me to self-sorcery, because there was this beautiful that is a complex cycle. It's not as easy to it's not as easy to explain as maybe a menstrual cycle and good, because it's not meant to be. Like us, she's contrary, like she's contradictory, contrary, and I like her for that. But there is this 19-ish month part of the Venus cycle where she descends, she comes into the underworld, she ascends, and then she self-initiates, if we're going to break it down. So for me, it's how we explore the totality, the full spectrum of being like a woman. So we kind of strip ourselves of all the stories, and it's like a 9-month descent. You strip yourself of all the stories of all of that, and then you come into the underworld bare, naked. You sit in the dark and the not knowing, the void, like the womb space, the cosmic womb space, and we're like, fuck, what's that? And then you get to pick up some of the stuff if you want to that you stripped off here, but there's this knowing. There's this deep knowing that you get to then ascend with. That just so I think of the first half of the Venus cycle of Joan of Arc, right? So you're on a mission, like you're stripping, you're like, oh, I'm going to war, but with myself. But not war, but more of it's a fight against all of the stories you've been told versus who you are. Go into the underworld, stripped bare, truth. Ascend, Mary Magdalene, this knowing, this, yes, I've been maligned, yes, I've been misunderstood, and I get to also be in my power. Like you can have all of the versions of me, but I know who I am. And then you self-initiate at this top space, which is that choice point, right? So for me, that's the cycle, but in it, it's been about learning how to love myself fully, learning how to be romantic, like how to really romanticize life. Like I say, I'm a cynical side-eye Scorpio, so that's not always been the easiest, and so that's why I think it's really interesting that I've been called to share it, because it's not always the easiest path. And Venus is a path of love, yes, because we're told that she's this goddess of beauty, but like she's also fierce. And I love that there's that soft, and it's how we get to be with the softness and the fierceness and be that wholeness of who we are.
Awesome. And that is out later this year, a few months' time, isn't it?
September. Yeah, it's out in September.
Very excited.
Oh.
Very excited. Lisa, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share today?
Oh, I don't know. I just think that thank you for having me. This is beautiful. I love us. I love us gathering. These conversations are so important, and just keep having conversations with the women in your life and about their experience. No one wants the information. Perhaps some people do, right? But I feel like the big magic, the big work, the most potent and powerful work will come when we weave our wisdom, when we tell our stories through the wisdom of the lived experience versus the information we're being given. because we know. Remember what you know.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It was just as juicy as I thought it would be and more. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references, and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.